everybody. Thank you all for coming tonight on behalf of the N Common Core Committee and Sue and I.
Yes, thank you.
We love that you're here tonight. Tonight is all about education and getting to know what is going to be on that ballot question in November. So a lot of people really relate to, you know, the math. When we go out and get signatures, people are like, oh, the math, the math. But the Common Core, there's a lot more to it than just a different way of doing math. So that's what we want to kind of explain to everybody tonight. And like a lot of you, we're parents, right?
Yes.
And this is personal for us. We've seen our kids go through the frustrations, and you know, I pulled my kids out of one private school and put them in another, and Sue has her own experience.
Yes, I pulled mine out, and I now homeschool them. And I think also what we want to get across too is there's so much more attached to this than just a new set of standards, and I think once you find out that there are so many strings attached to this, you guys will be amazed at what kind of came through and we weren't even made aware of. So we do have a sign-in sheet, so if people would like to sign up, you can just tell us your name and the town. If you want to leave your email, we can give you information about upcoming events, and we'd also like to know where you heard about us so we know that we're, you know, getting the word out in the right places. And we have a bunch of flyers and things if you want those. And then we have some great speakers, and we'll have questions and answers at the end. And if anyone has not signed the petition, we would love to get your signature because we need the votes. I mean, the signatures so we can get this on the ballot.
We're almost there.
We are so close.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
All right. So do you want to introduce?
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel. Donna Colorio will be along shortly, but right now we have Dr. Sandra Stotsky right here. Thank you so much for coming. She is credited with developing the country's strongest academic standards.
Speak up loud because that's not magnifying.
Okay. For K through 12. Can you hear me? Credited with developing the country's strongest academic standards for K through 12 students while serving as Senior Associate Commissioner for the Mass Department of Education and served on the National Common Core Validation Committee. Thank you so much for coming. And we also have Mr. John Swayze. Thank you also for coming. He is a Northbridge High School English teacher for the past 12 years. He has a BA in History from Eastern Connecticut State University and a Master's of Science in Professional Communication from Clark University. He's also the co-chair of the English department at Northbridge High School. And he's serving as the secretary?
VP now.
He's the VP. Congratulations are in order. He became the VP last night of his local teachers union. So we're so happy to have you. So I think you guys can kind of bounce off of each other, and I'll let you go forward.
Okay.
Okay.
This is just for being picked up for a YouTube eventually that Michael is going to do for us. So it doesn't amplify, and I will use my best fourth grade teacher's voice. If it doesn't carry from wherever you are, raise your hand so I'll know I have to speak louder. Okay. If it's loud enough, fine, then I won't yell any more than I have to. Let me introduce briefly myself again. I was at the Massachusetts Department of Education from 1999 to 2003, and I am the person responsible for almost all of the pre-Common Core standards that were used in all of the schools in Massachusetts, including yours, because it wouldn't make any difference what town or high school you're from here in this area. And I was the person also partly responsible for the shape of the MCAS tests as well, and for teacher licensure tests and a few other things in the department. I earned my money, believe me. I also later became a member of the Common Core Common Core Validation Committee, which was a committee formed nationally in 2009 to ensure, and this was the important charge to that committee, there were less than 30 of us. I was the major English language arts standards expert, and there was one mathematician
42.
on that committee. Okay, I don't know what the 42 is for. Oh, that's for meals, all right. Every setting has a different challenge, and that's my challenge for tonight, to ignore the numbers that are being called. Okay, but I was part of this less than 30-member committee, and our charge was to ensure that Common Core's standards in English and in math for K to 12 were, one, internationally benchmarked. We were supposed to be competitive with high-achieving countries. Two, that they were research-based. I was an academic researcher by training, so I knew the research on reading and English language arts. And three, we were supposed to ensure that they were rigorous. The mathematician and he was from Stanford University on the other side of the country, he and I talked a lot together, but we both came to our own conclusions, he for math and me for English language arts, that Common Core standards didn't meet any of those three criteria, so we refused to sign off on the Common Core standards. That meant we did not think that they were internationally benchmarked, comparable to the best out there. We knew they were not research-based. He had helped to write California's math standards, so he knew a lot about math and standards. And we knew they were not rigorous. But the other members went along. It was basically a rubber stamp committee. That's how I've described it in print elsewhere. Now, let's flash forward to Massachusetts and the ballot question. Why do we have a ballot question? As you probably know, if you have kids in the schools or if you teach in the schools, as this English teacher, Mr. Swayze, does, you will know that Common Core came into Massachusetts schools in 2010 by a vote of the Board of Education, and I happen to have been on that board at the time. I had been appointed by then outgoing Governor Romney just before Governor Patrick got into office. And the board that was in place in July 2010 voted to adopt Common Core standards and replace what we already had in English language arts and math with Common Core standards. Why? Even though they knew that our old standards had been very effective in this state, they had basically put Massachusetts kids right up at the top of what are called the nation's report cards, the NAEP test, National Assessment for Educational Progress tests. We were number one in grade 4 and in grade 8 in reading and in math, and we later took part in an international test with the acronym of TIMSS, Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. And we, in grade 8, tied for first place with Singapore in science and were among the top 6 countries in math. So we had outside corroboration or confirmation that we indeed did have good standards and were probably doing the right thing by our kids. It didn't mean that we had perfect standards or we didn't have a place more to go, but at least we were going in the right direction. So the question that's always been asked is, why did this board dump our good standards for Common Cores in 2010? And the best answer I can give you, because I was on the board at the time, was that when you're offered $250 million in race to the top money, that money buys you a lot. And it has a lot of influence, and Governor Patrick wanted that $250 million, so did the Department of Education, and so our standards were dumped, Common Cores were adopted, we got our $250 million as promised, and that was the end of our good standards. In other words, the quality of the standards didn't matter. It was what was the selling feature of those new standards, plus the $250 million. And the argument you will probably hear about why Common Core was a good deal is that it let Massachusetts teachers know what Mississippi teachers were doing. Now, I will ask you to think about how useful that information would be to you. Why would a Mississippi teacher or a Massachusetts teacher care what the other teachers' kids were doing? But we were told it was important to have standards the same for the whole country because it would equalize what everyone was taught, would make it easier to compare one state with another, and it would make it easier for military kids to go from one military base to another and not worry about what the standards were, if indeed they ever did worry. Of course, as I have been telling people since then, they should worry now because they had much better standards in Department of Defense schools before Common Core was adopted than they do now. They actually used to perform pretty highly. Their kids were almost always ahead of the local schools that these kids ever went to. But who cares about facts? I mean, facts are just pesky things that you just get rid of if they don't fit your theory or your argument. In any event, we have a ballot question that has been developed by a grassroots organization headed by Donna Colorio, who's on the Worcester School Committee, and it developed out of a growing frustration across the state, in town after town and in cities, about what was happening in their schools with standards that had a lot of strings attached to them. And I hope you'll tell us about some of those strings later on. The strings involved meaning you have to take a Common Core-based test instead of MCAS, based on the older standards, and indeed the MCAS tests you're now taking are based on Common Core standards, which is why the items are the same on the tests. It won't matter what the name of the test is. The test items will be Common Cores because that's what the state's official standards are.
60 and 65?
In any event, just ignore that pizza order unless it's you, I guess. But that was one of the major selling reasons. We also heard that Common Core standards were going to develop critical thinkers. Now, who could pass down an offer to develop critical thinking? We were also told it was going to develop deeper knowledge, deeper than what we were never told, but it was going to be deeper knowledge, that was for sure. So you were going to get a lot of things out of Common Core that supposedly you didn't get with your older pre-Common Core standards, the ones that I helped to develop in the state and that a lot of teachers in the state helped to develop. I want to go into who actually did do the writing of Common Core standards. But you have to know right off the bat, because I won't wait until the last page of the book to tell you, that so far there's no evidence that Common Core has done anything of its promises. We've had NAEP tests given every 2 years that we have to participate in, and the last results came out last October, not too long ago, and it turns out that Massachusetts is going down in grade 4 math, going down in grade 8 math and reading, not going up, going down, and the country as a whole is stalled. It hasn't improved low-achieving kids, and it's certainly not doing anything for higher-achieving kids. If anything, it's lowering the ceiling. So there are some problems with Common Core's standards. And the Gates Foundation, which has supported all of this, remember it has about $60 billion to play with, Gates has, and he's decided that he knows what's best for other people's children. His own children go to a private school in Seattle that's not Common Core, but he knows that everybody else's children would be better off with Common Core standards, so he's invested a lot of his money in funding the development of Common Core standards and then paying off all the organizations in education at state level, national level, to promote, disseminate, even to buy off opposition to Common Core standards. Now, who participated in writing Common Core standards? Number one, I've described this in many of my writings. These were people chosen by Gates himself or some people at an organization called Achieve Incorporated in Washington, D.C. They thought they knew who could write standards, even though they had no experience teaching or writing standards. And you have the other groups excluded that are important from this process. Gates and Achieve Incorporated chose the standards writers, but they excluded high school math and English teachers. They excluded college teaching faculty in English and in math, the two groups that you would expect would know something about college readiness by my logical thinking. And they left out parents, and they left out lots of other kinds of teachers, and they left out state legislators because they didn't want any discussion of the standards. They simply wanted what are called stealth standards. Get them through, get them approved by a governor, a board of ed, a commissioner of ed. That's it. No discussion over and done with. And get every superintendent in the state to go along with these standards. Why? Because if they want another job somewhere else, either in their own state or another state, they have to show that they have been in support of Common Core's standards. And the prohibition against talking against Common Core even extended to the teachers in the schools, and that you'll have to verify for yourself. We are lucky to have one teacher here, found out about him, I asked him to be on the panel, who's willing to talk about Common Core. But for the most part, we do not have teachers anywhere who will identify themselves to newspaper reporters or talk in public against
71.
Common Core standards because it would go down in their personnel folder. I was told this by a union coordinator in Morton, Illinois, who told me it was clear that no teachers would ever show up for any meetings I spoke at because it would be noted in their personnel folders and they couldn't take a chance with their jobs. So teachers were ignored and can't say anything. Parents have been the only noisy group across the country. Why? Because it's their kids, and they can't be hurt by any local school committee or by the state board of education. They can say something's wrong if they don't like or think there is something wrong with the math in their child's school curriculum. If they think that the readings that are being given to their children in the English language arts at all grade levels are not what they would think would be appropriate
70.
for their children, either at their grade level or just in general as being socially appropriate. So parents have been speaking up, and they have been speaking up in every state. There is an anti-Common Core parents group in every single state. You can Google and find their websites everywhere. And it has gotten to the point where 2 weeks ago, the governor of Utah was so annoyed with all the parents bothering him that he has called into existence a review of their Common Core state standards because he doesn't want to keep hearing from any more parents in the state. And this is what is beginning to happen, except that we now have, as of last week, a letter from the Gates Foundation that, interestingly enough, admitted that the Common Core experiment was not going well And they had learned their lesson. And what was their lesson? That teachers were not getting enough support and resources from their local governments. That was the lesson the Gates had learned. Not that there was something wrong with Common Core, but that they needed more money in material and support and resources. Not in salaries, but in support for resources and materials. Maybe they do, but I don't think that is really the first priority most teachers would say they would want to have. Now, the ballot question is here because we have an opportunity to act because the legislature won't act. Governor Baker pretends he is for or sometimes against Common Core. He's been on the fence for 6 years. He appointed a Secretary of Education named Jim Pizer, who needs to keep studying the problem. He was actually chair of the Board of Ed when I introduced all of these standards, and he loved them back in 2001, but he needs to keep evaluating them a little more so he has a better idea of whether he should be for or against them. So we don't have any help from Governor Baker or the person he appointed as Secretary of Education. So Donna Colorio in Worcester has gotten some help in putting together a ballot question that we hope will be on the November 2016 ballot. Now, why do we say hope? Because it turns out that Gates, who has over $60 billion to play with, doesn't want anybody contradicting what he thinks. So he's developed what I call Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Plan A was an attempt to derail the ballot question last year when Donna's group collected the first 100,000 signatures. Gates sent a lot of money to the MBAE, Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education, and asked them to file what was called a memo of opposition to the Attorney General's office, Maura Healey's office, saying that the ballot question was unconstitutional. Well, the AG's office said no, the ballot question was constitutional. So Plan A went up in flames. Plan B came out in January of this year. Gates gave over $500,000 to the MBAE, and so far as we can see, that money was used to pay, probably, we can't find exact records for it, but Foley Hogue is the law firm that was used to prepare the lawsuit against the ballot question. Foley Hogue, I got one reporter to look it up, and he said they charge maybe $700 an hour. It's a very pricey law firm. Maybe they charge more. But MBAE has filed a lawsuit that right now is being argued before the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts. And what that means is that we're still not sure whether the ballot question will be declared constitutional or unconstitutional, but it has to be declared one way or the other by July because the ballot for November gets printed up in July. There are real-life things that happen that make decisions take place at the Supreme Court level in Massachusetts. So that's Gates' Plan B. Now, he does have a Plan C in the wings, waiting. Plan C was announced about a month ago. He's given money to the MBAE to form what is called a coalition, a group that is going to argue against anyone who wants to vote yes on the ballot question in November. And who did he get to head this coalition but our former Commissioner of Education, Bob Antonucci, who used to be also at Fitchburg State College. Very nice guy, and he was willing to serve as the head of this coalition, which isn't doing much right now because everyone's waiting for the judicial opinion to come down, so we know whether the ballot is constitutional and can be printed up to appear on the November ballot. It will ask voters to vote yes if you want to get rid of Common Core standards. It will tell the voters that if you vote yes, you will restore your old standards and then can revise them if you wish, according to procedures that are spelled out in the ballot question. That is what Michelle and others here are hoping you will sign. We need to get another 11,000 signatures this summer so that we can complete the legal process for getting a constitutional ballot question on the ballot in November. Now, why should you want to get rid of Common Core? A couple of very good reasons, in addition to the ones that I gave you earlier. They're not competitive. Your kids will be able to get into college with a weak Algebra 2, which means that they can't get into engineering colleges or get a degree in a STEM area, science, technology, engineering, and math, because the standards aren't there. Common Core is basically an attempt to dumb down most of the population. It's an attempt to try to beef up the bottom 25%, but to close the gap, it wants to lower the level at the high school level. Now, you may be complaining, as many parents have, about the very complex and tricky questions in the elementary grades. That will turn off, for the most part, any kid who's interested in math, because this turns out to be the chief effect of these tricky and difficult questions, to write out why you think 2 + 2 is 4. I mean, if a second grader is asked to write, why is 2 + 2 4? It's not easy to come up with an answer that's going to get full credit. So you've got that problem with your Common Core standards. I see we also have cell phones, so this is not a movie theater or a cinema where I have to tell you, turn off your cell phone first, but it would help because we do have pizza order numbers coming down too. In any event, the other reasons are not only that you have low-quality high school math standards, and there are other problems with the geometry standards at the high school level, you also have low-quality English language arts standards in terms of what they expect kids to have read or studied. In the older standards, we did expect kids to read works by well-known authors, good prose. There's nothing built into Common Core standards that's going to make any English teacher, except from the goodness of their heart, teach something worthwhile teaching. So that's why we would like to get rid of Common Core standards and get back the chance for the kind of standards that actually improved everybody, because that was their record. All demographic groups improved. And I'm going to finish in a few minutes now and let Mr. Swayze take over to say a few words that he may want to say on the strengths and the weaknesses of Common Core as he sees it firsthand, by just saying that I was behind the philosophy for developing all of the standards that we used to use. And what was key to us, and I was reporting to David Driscoll, our commissioner, for many years at the time, one of the key issues was that we wanted to see all kids do better. Not just the bottom, we wanted all kids to improve. That was the expectation built in. The other expectation was that knowledge or content mattered, that we wanted to see all kids learning something. And in English, that meant some literary historical knowledge, so you'd end up knowing something if you were going to be a critical thinker. You can't think with nothing in your head. It's not easy to do. So right now, let me ask Mr. Swayze to pick up that hot potato and tell us at Northbridge High, what you see, pro or con, and I'll give you this to hold because that will pick up there.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. And
We'll have Q&A afterwards.
geez, I don't really know what there is to add. This was a pretty exhaustive recitation of all the problems with Common Core. I kind of feel like you're the general up at HQ looking down. I'm just a grunt in the trenches. So
That's why you're actually more important than me. You know what's been happening on the ground. I talk at 30,000
Yep.
feet above the ground.
I do have to say, I didn't know about the personnel file thing. I may not be wanting to do this now. I don't know, but
They have a better school system
Maybe,
than the one I
maybe,
heard
yeah.
about in Morton, Illinois.
or better union. Who knows? So anyway, but thank you everybody for coming. I will do what I can to add just a little bit of kind of local flavor and give you just our own experience. It is correct that it is a dumbed down set of standards. We had very strong frameworks that were very robust, very specific. We had great. I'm going to use some edubabble, so I do apologize. We had good curriculum maps. Basically, when you would have a unit as part of your curriculum, what would be taught, what standards would be taught. These have been refined for many years, using very good, strong standards. When we got Common Core in, it came in like a whirlwind. And I'll talk in just a second about the process, which to me is actually almost as difficult a thing to deal with as the. Watch yourself.
All right, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have told you there was water delivered to us.
Go ahead, I'm
Pardon me a
sorry,
second.
That was me.
Okay. Oh yeah, protect those. Those are like gold. Okay. So the difference, and I'll be honest, I had to kind of go back and look at the old standards, and I was sad to see I went on the MES Department of Ed website, and DESE had them archived. I'm like, no, not archived. We want them back. And just to kind of compare and contrast, and part of the problem with Common Core, at least from the English standards, and there's a lot of problems with them across the board, but they're very vague and broad in a lot of ways, and then extraordinarily and bizarrely specific in others. So, for instance, you might have conduct routine research over time in various forms, and that's sort of an amorphous standard. And then you go down a little bit more, and it says use semicolons properly with subordinate clauses. And it makes me wonder if there was someone who had a hair across, whatever, about using subordinate clauses properly, and they stuck that in there. Maybe Melinda Gates didn't like that. I don't know. But we had a real problem getting it implemented because the race to the top, and I think the figure you cited was $250 million, sounds like a lot of money. When it came to our local district, I believe, and I might be incorrect about this, but the figure was something like. See, I'm happy that Common Core math has not reached upstairs yet. They still know how to count properly. The problem that we found was that of that $250 million, we got somewhere around $70,000 for our district. A one-time payment, which sounds lovely and could hire a teacher or two, once. But $70,000 in the grand scheme of years and years and years of budgeting is just a drop in the bucket. But with that money came a great deal of obligations. We had a lot of strings attached. And because we were a race to the top district, and it sounds good. It sounds very good. Oh, we're a high-performing district, and we're going to be a race to the top district, and that's great. But with it came the Common Core standards, came new evaluation standards for teachers as well. And we had just gotten done in our district getting some what we thought were really good locally developed evaluation standards, which we then had to entirely scrap. And I think the major problem with Common Core is that it is very top down. You were told this is what you're going to be doing. You're also going to be implementing this new standard. You guys figure out how to make it happen. And so we spent most of 2010 just absolutely scrambling. And everyone at the end of that year was very frustrated because we didn't know what the new evaluation entailed. We were trying to tear apart old curriculum and write new curriculum. And of course, it took a while for the publishers to catch up with Common Core. So it's just been the past year or two, we're starting to see educational book catalogs come out with Common Core specific books. When it first came out, it was all race to the top districts who got the Common Core standards early. There wasn't a lot to draw from. So we were trying to make stuff up out of whole cloth. It just was a very, very frustrating time. And we felt voiceless. The parents felt voiceless. And this ballot initiative, if nothing else, Common Core could be the greatest set of standards ever. They're not, but let's say they are. If nothing else, this gives the people of Massachusetts a chance to have their voice heard and to choose. And quite frankly, I was very proud of the fact that we were at the top of the national report card, that we had really, really good standards. And, there's the old idea that we have 50 different states, 50 different laboratories in which to try various initiatives. So our standards were, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this because, again, you have the 30,000 view, but when I spoke with a fellow who had been on the original board, the Common Core standards were supposed to be modeled off of our own. And they they diverged from that pretty quickly. So we had a laboratory, Massachusetts, that had produced some really good standards, and then, as you say, we got drawn down into a kind of a morass of mediocrity. So for us, we've spent the past 5 years trying to struggle with this, and I guess in some ways with the high school English, I teach 9th and 10th grade mostly. Much of what we're asked to do does rhyme with the old standards, but not enough to not have to need to tear apart the old and try to bring in the new. So that's really been our day-to-day experience with it. It's just a lot of frustration, a lot of mandates coming down all at once. The state then came in and put in something called district-determined measures, where you're supposed to be testing the kids. We were, I think, fortunate enough to not be one of the districts that ended up doing PARC. We did one session of English PARC as a test, and it was an unmitigated disaster. So a lot of this came about because we're given these mandates, but then no way to implement them. So the PARC that we tried to do, it was all computer-based. Well, that's lovely. MCAS is pencil and paper-based. If you ask everybody in the sophomore class to take the PARC exam, you need to have however many computer terminals for however many sophomores you have. So, of course, hardly any school has that. There's very little forethought and planning was put into this. It was all dumped very, very quickly, and we left to scramble to try to implement it, which is another reason why it's such a disaster. That's really been my day-to-day. I don't know if that was what we were hoping to kind of get into, but
Fine.
Yeah.
Let me just add one more word before I give Donna, and I'll let you get a few words in edgewise more about the ballot question. Costs. I was asking earlier some of the parents here, what have been the arguments made by your local superintendents or administrators for keeping Common Core? And apparently the big reason given is that it's going to cost you too much money to undo what you've spent money on in the past 5 years. The problem with that answer is that it doesn't tell you how much more it's going to cost you in the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, for the rest of your life and the future budgets of your towns or cities to support the technology infrastructure that you need for the computer-based tests. MCAS, as we just were told, was paper and pencil. It didn't cost that much, and professional development for teachers was the ordinary professional development. You might know better yet. I couldn't attach a price to any town, but the older standards reflected teachers' training and did not cost a great deal for teachers to take professional development. Whether it was good or bad is a separate discussion and an issue. But we are told over and over again, in fact, that's what the Gates Foundation is now claiming, is that teachers need professional development forever in order to learn how to teach Common Core. So given what it's going to cost towns and cities, and I know in Brookline where I live, what we have for a huge technology budget, plus a computer specialist in every elementary school to teach keyboarding to first, second, and third graders so they can be ready for the tests that are given on a computer, that it's costing a very large, unspecified item in the school committee budget, which even our finance committee doesn't dare to question our school committee about very specifically. What is all of this money for? It's for data management in central office. It's for computer teaching, keyboard teaching. It's for testing needs that we need to have. It's very vague, and no one can say, why do we need to spend that much on testing kids? Maybe the money could be spent in some other ways that might be better for teachers and kids. It's going to cost a fortune that no one can accurately estimate. But your superintendents will keep telling you, we can't undo Common Core because we've invested 5 years in it. So therefore, keep throwing good money after bad.
Okay.
Because who knows? We've got